All right. So today is going to be really looking at the history of rhetoric. All right. So I'm going to talk through what our goals are in a moment, and I'm going to be doing a lot of diagramming up here, and it's going to start to all come together and make sense. I'm hoping. And if not, then we need to continue to talk. You may follow along in your textbook or your resource book if you like. I'm going to be on in chapter 2, section 3, talking about free speech and specifically about the First Amendment, and also talking a little bit about ethics again. So actually talk a lot about ethics again. So keep that in mind that this is referencing back, but I'm going to be giving you some additional information. Okay, some reminders starting off. August 26th is tomorrow. Your orientation quiz should be 100%. If it's not 100%, you missed one of those questions, you need to contact me immediately so that we can do a reset and you can take that test again. If you don't take it and pass it, we do have an issue. And if you don't take it at all, I do have to drop you, unfortunately. All right. 8:30 coming up around the corner is your outline for your special occasion speech. Now that's going to be a draft, and by a draft that means that it should be about 90 to 90% perfect. All right, it's not going to be perfect, that's okay. And the reason is because I'm going to give you some really good details so that you can make it perfect. This is the only time, module 1, that we do a draft. Everything else, when you submit the outline, is going to be for grade. All right. Now, we did a trial, and on Sunday night, you had due your outline for your elevator speech. All right. You did not have to do a video, but you did need to do the outline. Okay. I'm going to try and get it so that we have an extra credit opportunity for you to do the video, but that's not available just yet. So just on Sunday night, you should have submitted it as a PDF, no Google Docs, just as a PDF, your outline. I am going to grade it tonight and tomorrow. So you'll have a grade by the end of the day tomorrow. That will enable you to know what you need to do to improve your special occasion speech, all right? Now keep in mind, I am going to be very picky. Very, very picky. And the reason is because we have amazing data that says when you go through this process, you are doing a cybernetic processing, which is actually a neuro-linguistic imprinting in your brain. So this process that I give you and the detail that I expect, and even the layout and design may feel tedious, and you may say, you know, this is just like craziness or busy work. It's not. This is legitimate, proven techniques that we've been using for actually quite a few years and been backed up by science to really illustrate the importance of how you get this information in you so that you can deliver it without reading from your notes. All right. Additionally, it was the elevator speech outline was low stakes. So you either get 20 points or 25. Don't think that if you got 25 that your outline is perfect. I will be giving everybody detailed comments. So read my comments, all right? And that will be helpful to get you ready to do your assignment that's due on the 30th, all right? So we're going to be building. This is a class that requires you to do. You got to do. But we got to do the development before we can do the delivery, all right? We don't wing it. It's not about winging it. Okay. Also, always remember PDFs, no Google Docs. And some of you have been sending me emails on your own private email accounts. I will not respond. I will not respond. That is against our Sandhills policy. I can only communicate with you on SEC email, and you can only communicate with me. I will not open any other emails. And that is to protect our system so that we don't have any attacks, hacks, or anything like that. So keep that in mind. Okay, so let's go in and talk about the history of rhetoric. Now I'm going to cover a whole semester of world history, or specifically Greek history. And what I'm going to do is give you, first of all, a definition of rhetoric. And rhetoric is the art, that's what we call it, an art of persuasion. There is some science to it, and when we start to get into where is truth, objective, and we start to take a look at honesty and ethics, there is absolutely a science to rhetoric as well. But for what we're going to do right now, starting from the point that we as Western society have been drastically influenced by the Greeks. So even though we've had wonderful influencers from the Romans, from the Germans, from the Spanish, and then later from the English, it really starts with what we got from the Greeks, the ancient Greeks. And this is about 500, 600 BCE, before the Common Era. But it was so profound that the Romans adopted it, and from then on, it just spread throughout the Western world. And then, of course, when we were settled here in the United States by Westerners, then it was adopted here as well. It is different from Eastern, very different from Eastern. And if any of you are Native American, Native Americans identify actually more strongly with Eastern philosophy, and that's a whole other course. So if I was speaking to a group of Lumbee Americans, I would make sure that I took into account the way they process information culturally, okay? So there is some of that to recognize. For those of you who travel, you're going to be in business, and you're going to Japan, or you're going to Korea, or you're going to Africa, you're going to want to, or the Middle East, any place outside of what's considered Western, you will want to study up on their way of thinking processes. But for us, in COM 231, we're going to focus on the Western, okay? Now, it doesn't mean it's better. It just means that's what's used most often here, right? Okay, so we're going to start off with what not to be, all right? I'm going to put it in an ugly red. I like red, but for right now, it's going to be an ugly red. Do not become a sophist. Sophists are known for sophistry. The word sophomore, which is utilized to describe the status of students like in a in a high school or a college, to be a sophomore status means, well, you're not at the bottom of the rung, but you're also certainly not at the top. So there's some lack of sophistication, lack of knowledge and experience associated with being a sophist. If somebody ever says to you, stop being so sophomoric, that is not a compliment. Even if you are a sophomore, all right? That is coming out and saying that you lack experience, you are lacking wisdom, and you are lacking education, all right? So it's not a nice thing to be called. But we have to start here, all right? because there were two dominant schools of teaching public speaking in ancient Greece. Okay? There were sophists or sophistry, and then I'm going to put the other by the Socratic method, which you're going to recognize as Socrates. Okay, so those are schools. These were literally people who got paid, teachers, wise people, to teach the wealthy males in Greece who believed in democracy and had a senate, all right, that it was their citizen responsibility to be effective orators, okay, orators, right, which they gave orations. And so oral comes from that. And what that means then is that these were people who, because of their status, because of their economics, because of their land holding, and because of their power position in government, they had to learn how to be an effective and eloquent speaker. All right? The schools that taught the young boys were schools that were pushing their style. Okay? Sophistry, and this one is really, really important, because as you guys are audience members and you looked at the Democratic National Convention information from last week and the Republican National Convention from this week and the speakers on both sides, you have a chance to evaluate them to determine if one or more of them fall under this school or this school. I mean, the timing could not be more perfect for you to understand what's going on here. Because although this is ancient Greece, this, and what I'm going to draw down here, is still being taught today in classes such as what you're taking here. But unfortunately, that's still out there and prevalent. Sophistry is all about the show. It's all about the bells, the whistles. It's all about the theatrics, the drama. It's all about, remember when I was talking about the pyramid from your textbook that says that there are, there's the intent, all right? And then there's the means, and then there's the end. Well, this group of that pyramid is really only focused on the result, the end, and how they get there, which is their means, is going to oftentimes be through lies, falsehoods, misrepresentations, half-truths, flat out lies, et cetera, right? And so as you were watching and reviewing last week and watching this week, you need to, as citizens of the United States, put on your thinking hats, your critical analysis hats, to find out which camp they're from. All right? Now, let's talk about this. The major separation is what we call substance, right? Substance. In this arena, we are looking for content, all right? The substance, the statistics, the data, the truth. Over here, as I said, they're looking at the show. So a good Socratic speaker, and that's you and me, who follows good ethics, we may not be the slickest speaker out there. We may not be the most entertaining. We may be the most inspirational. But we care about the audience, and we care about truth, and we care about the greater good. So Socrates taught the concept of why. A good public speaker, a good citizen, asks the questions why. Why should a person know this? Why should a person care about this? Why does this matter to the environment? Why does this matter to civil liberties? Why does this matter to your pocketbook? Why does this matter, etc., etc., etc.? Because when you are able to get at the core, the root of the whys, then you're able to understand what's the best course of action or recommendations to give. But you got to dig in deep, and you can't stay on the surface. So that requires a lot of digging. In fact, in the Socratic method, when we use consulting, a very popular practice is what we use called the 5 whys. So when a client makes a statement, then I'm going to ask that client, I'm going to probe and say, well, why is that the case? And that client's going to give more detail. I'll say, okay, let's pull out this piece. Why do you think that is happening? Okay, pull out that piece. What facts do you have? What evidence, what support do you have that that is the case? Pull out that evidence. And so you keep narrowing and narrowing and narrowing so that you get to the root, the core of issues. Not symptoms of problems, but what's the real problems, okay? So systemic racism, that is the core. That's the institutionalist of what we are dealing with in today's world. Okay, so that's Socrates. Love this guy, but he was a threat, like all really good people are, to these people. He knew he was going to be killed, so he drank a cup of hemlock and killed himself so that he didn't have to go through what they were going to do. All right, very sad. Now, he had a student. He had 2 students, but one very well-known student, and you have probably heard of him as Plato. I ever hear of Plato? Oh man, Plato was a cool dude. He wrote lots of great documents that are used today to understand what it means to be an effective public speaker. And what Plato did was he took what any good scholar does, and he made connections, but then he extended the teachings of Socrates into even more clarity. And what he did was he say, what a good public speaker who is speaking for the good of people must do is be in search of truth. Actually, it needs to be a capital T, truth. And to do that, it requires logical, okay, logos, logical inquiry that is based on facts, observations. What can you see? What can you touch? What can you, prove, etc. So capital T and logic is highly connected to objective data. Objective data. So when you are doing your research for your speeches, you are going to want to pull in objective truth. Right? It's critical to understand and to present your cases. Here's something that we have to be so careful of. And this is something you have to listen to or listen for. The anecdote. The anecdote. One person's story who the speaker says represents everybody. Okay? That's called anecdotal information. Now, I don't want to negate the importance of one person's experience, because that is that person's experience and it's real to that person. But one person's experience does not equate for all people's experiences, right? So have to be careful that we don't listen to one person's story and say, well, all. Okay? Never want to do that. Okay, so that's Plato. Plato was all about truth, and he said that we must be logical. And we must be logical in our truth search for the answers to the why questions. Okay. All right, but he wasn't alone. There was another student of Socrates, also a contemporary of Plato, went in another extension, a direction, all right? Absolutely agreed with all of these, but added another truth, okay? And that is Aristotle. Aristotle is my favorite guy in the whole world. Well, not the whole world, but he speaks a lot of truth. All right, now what he said was, we must do the whys, we must be logical, therefore we've got to have the logos as we are preparing our speeches and to understand issues and problems, so that when we are going to try and persuade somebody to act, do, say, or what have you, or policies to be enacted, laws to be passed, etc. He added more components. And again, this is where I want you to look at both sides of the coin, whether it's far right or far left or in the middle, okay? Aristotle gave us ethos, credos, and pathos. All right? Ethos are your ethics. So right here in this middle part, Aristotle said we must include and maintain an ethical means at all times. So that means we don't plagiarize. That means we use responsible data. That means that we don't prejudice one over another. That means that we are going to look at both sides of a story. That means that we're going to be as objective as possible in our ethics to try and understand. Okay? Objective truth. That's the ethics. You don't plagiarize. You don't claim that something is your own when it's not. All right? Oh, but this is what he also said. He said that we must also look at the credibility of the speaker. That's credos, credibility. In fact, in your outline, hopefully you remember that there was a line in the template that said credibility statement, or your credibility. You have an obligation to your audience to establish up front in your speeches, and then to maintain credibility all the way through to the end. And what establishes your credibility are a couple of things. Number one, your personal experience in the real world or with the issue or what have you. What training you have experienced, such as on-the-job training and or education. But more importantly, Do you walk the talk? Is what you say in concert with what you do? Is your behavior the same as the messages that you are sending in your speeches? If this is off kilter, then a person's credibility as a speaker, and you as an audience member should question it. That's not being fake news. That's not being belligerent. That's being a responsible citizen. Challenge, challenge, challenge. All right? Because challenging is how you find out, again, where is real truth. Now, Aristotle also did another thing. And Aristotle introduced what's known as empathy. That's what pathos refers to, is empathy and or sympathy, but mostly empathy. Empathy means that the speaker can understand and share, all right? And this is where it gets a little interesting. Subjective truths. Subjective. All right? So when Kobe Bryant died in the helicopter accident, I'm from Los Angeles, and it was a pretty devastating thing. It was, in fact, out of Calabasas, that whole area is right where my son lives. And my experience, my shared truth to Kobe Bryant was, a sincere sadness. It was close to some sympathy. I felt bad for the family, obviously felt bad for him and his daughter and everything that went along with that. But I have a reputation on campus of coaching or teaching, a lot of our basketball players. I am at every home game. I am probably one of the biggest SEC fans. Well, no, there's probably 2 or 3 bigger than me, but I love our players and our volleyball players. I attend all the home volleyball games as well. And when Kobe Bryant died, I felt bad, but my subjective truth was different for a young man who I've taught in every class I teach here. He is now playing, at the university level. And I felt so bad for him because his identification with, he saw Kobe Bryant as one of his idols, as the type of person he wanted to be like. A family man, a beautiful wife, living the dream, wants to think about going and playing in Europe because he knows he probably won't play in the NBA. So I don't have the same truth as he does. And Aristotle says that doesn't make his truth different from my truth. It makes their truths different, but it doesn't mean that we don't have a truth. All right. So what you want to do is to listen to our speakers. How many of those people who are speaking at these conventions have some degree of connection? All right. How do they relate to the people in the audience? Is it genuine or not? It's better, but sometimes it can't be exact. Right? Empathy, pathos, is about feelings. So if you back the other day when I was drawing the process model, all of your communication, all of your speeches are going to begin with a thought, an idea, or a solution, or a feeling. And Aristotle gave truth to people's feelings. Okay? Do you feel that something is not ethical? Your position on abortion, that is a feeling truth for you. Capital punishment, that's a feeling truth for you. Women's issues, that's a feeling truth for you. Right? And you may have a different truth than somebody else because they're not exactly the same. But don't diminish one over the other. Okay, does that make sense? So, if you're not registered to vote, please go get registered. And if anybody needs to know how to do that, send me an email and I'll give you the connection information for how you can get registered, and you can ask for your absentee ballot. So if you are qualified to vote, please go vote. All right. So that means then that we have some responsibilities. And as public speakers, our responsibilities in the development of our speeches, even if it's a personal narrative, right, is that we are going to tell truth. And that we are going to live by the things of the second school of rhetoric, not the first. We're going to deal with substance, not just show. Okay? So, one of the things that we have to do is respect the integrity of ideas from others. So you'll want to be sure that you are listening in your sources and in your speeches. I'm going to teach you how to do what's called an attribution, where you attribute the source of your information inside your speech as you actually tell your audience. You don't say, well, some people say, or a lot of people think. No, we're going to say 76%, according to the Pew report conducted on August 24th, 2002, right? Et cetera, et cetera. You also have a responsibility to recognize that the end could have an impact on people's lives, even in your class. Even in our speeches that you give in our class, you will impact others. You will influence your peers. You may give a speech that's from the heart that changes a whole new perspective for a classmate. Right? So even in our class, what you say matters. Words matter. So you will want to have a genuine concern for the consequences of what you say and how you say it. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about called crap. Don't give me crap, which translates into shit. All right? So that means then that you need to substantiate, defend all of the elements that you put together in your speeches with examples, concrete, realistic, etc. So let's take a look at what CRAP stands for. Okay, CRAAP, and this information is in your Moodle course, but I really want you to recognize the importance of it right now, right here. So CRAAP. C equals current, up-to-date information sources within the last, let's say, 2 years. At times, you may go back and look at what's known as a seminal piece of literature. And this lecture I just gave you on Aristotle and Socrates and Plato, that was referring to their seminal work that they did 500, 600 before the Common Era years. It's still so profound and so important that we still utilize it. And you give credit to where it's due. So current means if you're going to use a statistic, it should be in the last 2 or 3 years, any statistics. If you're using concepts, it can have a little bit longer time frame, right? R equals relevant. Now, when you get into looking at your persuasive speech topics and your arguments and defenses, that's going to be really important. It also matters in your other speeches that you stay on task and on point. So whatever you have in your thesis, you want to stay true to it. You don't want to start adding in a lot of kitchen sink kind of stuff. You want to stay true to your outline, true to what your thesis is. Okay, so that relevancy means that you stay on point. You stay within the parameters of your speech. Sometimes that means that when you come out and you actually say, I'm not going to talk about A, B, and C. For this speech, I'm only going to talk about D. Right? So you are pointed, you are task-driven, and it's very, very relevant to the audience and to the topic. Now, relevancy to the audience. One of the speeches you're going to evaluate is a speech that's delivered at Emory University to the graduates of Emory University in Atlanta. And it's delivered by an amazing speaker. And it's very relevant. I want you to listen to it. In fact, you can use this to help analyze that for that paper. It's very relevant to the people who are graduating. And it's interesting to figure out why. So, for instance, when you are listening to what's being stated from the conventions, listen to making sure that it's relevant to you, not to a group that doesn't pertain to you. All right, the first A represents accurate. If you quote somebody, make sure you quote it correctly. If you quote a statistic, make sure it's correct. If you reference anything, make sure that you give an accurate source citation, both at the end of your speech as well as to your within the speech itself. Okay, so you have to stay accurate. The next one is authoritative. And this relates to that credibility issue that I talked about. What gives the author or the researcher or the speaker the right to give information that you're going to use? Is it because of their experience, of their training, their education, their, what have you, research, etc. And then the last one is positive purpose. The P. Everything you do, everything you talk about in this class should be for the good. For the good of others, not the good of you. For the good of others. That's what we mean by citizenry. We are looking out for the good of all, or the good of a group that you're standing up or you're speaking for. Sometimes at the expense for yourself. Okay? So it's the good. All right? Positive purpose. We also want to make sure that you are going to be assessing each other. So there will be occasions when you may actually take a look, and actually you will be doing this, you will critique some of your classmates' speeches, critically analyze them in terms of the quality of their research and how they recognized it in their speech. Right? Okay, so the First Amendment is how we're going to conclude. The First Amendment, as stated here in your book, says Congress, not the Senate, not the House of Representatives, not the President, not the branch of the Supreme Court, but Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. In other words, freedom of religion. Or abridging the freedom of speech, our ability to speak. Or of the press. The press has an obligation and they will not be silenced. Or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, to march, to protest, and to petition, to ask for the government of redress of grievances, to correct the government's mistakes. Very powerful, very powerful. It does not give us the permission to incite harm against others. So as we look at positive purpose and we're looking at what we're trying to achieve, if what you're trying to do is going to bring about positive change, then your means must also be positive. I grew up in the 1960s. Students were wearing black armbands to protest the Vietnam War. Students were having sit-ins in the middle of the quads to protest whatever was the moment of protest. I didn't eat lettuce for about a year and a half in support of Cesar Chavez for the migrant farm workers in California. So those are all examples of freedoms to exercise a protest in a manner that is going to have a positive purpose, but does not cause harm to somebody else. Very important. So peaceful protest, peaceful. Okay. Any questions? Does it all make sense? Does it all give you something to think about, I hope? All right. Well, I'm going to let you go ahead and leave early if you like. Some of you may want to stick around if, let's see, Megan has a question for me. I do have some time before I have to escape. Wait a minute, there's another person. Speak to, hold on. Oh, Mr. Thomas, if you could stick around, that'd be great. I don't have to send you an email. All right. And Miss McDermott. Okay, I'm going to turn off our recording.